So let's look at some arguments that we often see in Scripture, or that people make in Scripture. And the number one that I know you know of is the wedding feast at Cana. In John chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. This is probably the most well-known, or maybe the second most well-known passage concerning wine. And people want to go here and make the argument, well, Jesus made alcoholic wine at this wedding feast. So, if Jesus did make alcoholic wine, and that is your stance, and you are asserting that to be true, then on what grounds do you free our Lord from violating Proverbs chapter 23 and verse 31? Proverbs 23 and verse 31. Look not thou upon the wine when it is red, when it giveth its color in the cup, when it moveth itself aright, at the last it biteth like a serpent, and stingeth like an adder. Or, Proverbs 20 and verse 1, that wine is a mocker and strong drink is raging, and you would not be wise to partake of that. Jesus made new wine. New wine, fresh, of the purest form, is the wine that Jesus made. The grape juice is what He made. Look at chapter 2 and verse 10 of John. John chapter 2 and verse 10. And He saith unto him, every man at the beginning doth set forth good wine, and when men have well drunk, then that which is worse. But thou hast kept the good wine until now. That passage confuses some because of the wording that the translators used. So we need to look at what these words are, what they mean. The good wine. The word good is a Greek word called kalos. Kalos means beautiful, good, of good quality or disposition. It is superior. And I believe the English Standard translates that as superior. This is not an old wine. This is not a fermented liquid, one that has set for a long period of time and changes take place in it. This was a good wine, a superior wine. Another phrase here is well drunk. That comes from the Greek word methuo. Methuo means drunk freely, drunk sufficient or sufficiently, satisfied, well drunk. When you put it in with the other words that it can be translated as, you get the picture, or you see the idea of well drunk. It is that they were satisfied, that they had drank to the point that they were filled. They drank all that they wanted. And what were they drinking? They were drinking good wine, good oinos, good grape juice, unfermented liquid. The English Standard says, and He said unto them, everyone serves the superior wine first, and when people are satisfied, then the inferior wine, but you have kept the good quality wine until now. Jesus did not make fermented wine at this wedding feast. There's too many scriptures that Jesus would have known that He would have violated in doing this. Why would Jesus provide something to the people of this wedding that would defile them? Look at Daniel chapter 1 and verse 8. What did Daniel say? Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the king's dainties or with the wine that he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Why would Jesus provide something to the people of the wedding feast that would ultimately put them in a state to cause nakedness? You remember Noah, right? You remember what happened to Noah? In Genesis chapter 9, verses 20 and 21, and Noah began to be a husbandman. He kept a garden, planted a vineyard, and he drank of the wine. And what was the result? He was drunken. Further from that, and he was uncovered with his tent, in his tent. He was naked, and his son saw him. We've already mentioned Proverbs 20 and verse 1. Why would Jesus provide something that mocks or deceives? Wine is a mocker. Strong drink is a brawler. And whosoever erreth thereby is not wise. It deceives. Why would Jesus provide something that would pervert your judgment? Proverbs 31 verses 4 and 5, the American Standard says, "It is not for kings, O Lemuel, it is not for kings to drink wine, nor for princes to say, 'Where is the strong drink?' Why? Lest they drink and forget the law and pervert the justice due to any that is afflicted." It was very important for kings to be able to execute justice and judgment, just as it is for us today. To be able to examine ourselves. Why would Jesus provide this that would pervert judgment? Or something that would bring sorrow. Proverbs 23, verses 29 through 30. Who hath woe? Who hath sorrow? Who hath contentions? Who hath complaining? Who hath wounds without cause? Who hath redness of the eyes? I'll tell you who. They that tarry long at the wine, they that go to seek out mixed wine. Those are the ones that have woe, that have sorrow, contentions. Why would Jesus provide this? And something that you could drink to the point that would render you unconscious. Genesis 19, 32 and 33, Lot and his daughters had escaped from the city. And it says, "Come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him, that we may preserve seed of our father." And they made their father drink wine that night, and the firstborn went in, lay with her father, and he knew not when she lay down, nor when she arose. His senses dulled so much to the point that he was unaware of what was even taking place. Why would Jesus provide this drink for these individuals at this wedding? Another instance in Scripture that we could look at, Matthew chapter 11, verses 16 through 19. Sometimes this passage is referenced, and because of what is mentioned of Jesus here, that this is an excuse for someone to drink socially. Now, I want you to continue to remember as we talk about wine, what is contained in the wine is what is of importance. It's the alcohol. Alcohol is in the wine, it's in beer, it's in hard liquor, it's in all of these things. The grape juice alone affects you not. It's the alcohol. Let us remember that as we continue through this study. Matthew 11, verses 16 through 19 says, "But whereunto shall I liken this generation? It is like unto children sitting in the markets and calling unto their fellows, saying, "We have piped unto you, and you have not danced. We have mourned unto you, and you have not lamented." You're not giving us the reaction that we want, in other words. You know how children are. "For John came neither eating or drinking, and they say, He hath the devil. The Son of God came eating and drinking, and they say, Behold, a man gluttonous and a winebibber, a friend of the publicans and sinners, but wisdom is justified of her children." So here, Jesus compares this immature nature of children. A child is piping a song. They didn't give the right reaction, so he did something else. John here is criticized for his limited lifestyle. He was a Nazirite, as we've already mentioned. There were some things that he didn't do. But John the Baptizer, was changing lives. And then they criticized Jesus because he tried to influence others out of their sin. And so they make these statements about him. And that's all this is they're making accusations about Christ. They're making accusations about John. This is not a proof text that Jesus was a drinker. That is not the understanding that we are to glean from this passage. Another one, Luke chapter 9, verses 36 through 39. This one is well known, the parable of the wineskins. And people often get mixed up with this one as well. Luke chapter 5 and verse 36, "And he spake also a parable unto them. No man putteth a piece of a new garment upon an old." Pay attention to the use of new and old, and it will help you understand this passage. "If otherwise, then both the new maketh a rent, and the piece that was taken out of the new agreeth not with the old. No man putteth new wine into old bottles." Notice the transition. We have a new and old with cloth. You have this garment is new and this one is old. How well are they going to go together? You could put them together, but there would be some problems. And now the transition here. "No man putteth new wine into old bottles." Why? "Else the new wine will burst the bottles and be spilled, and the bottles shall perish." They will be broken. They will be good for nothing. You can't use them. "But new wine," now here's something else, a different thought here. "But new wine must be put into new bottles, and both are preserved. No man also having drunk old wine straightway desireth new, for he saith, The old is better." The phrase "old is better" has caused individuals to think that Jesus is talking about fermented wine. The old is better. The old wine is better. But it's not the wine that is the teaching here in this passage. It is not that he's promoting this. We see the same lesson with the old and new cloth. The new cloth will shrink, will not match with the old. The new wine will stretch the old wineskins too much. When you put new wine into old bottles, the new wine is going to have gases and things that needs to be released. And the old bottle has already stretched, and the new wine is going to make it stretch even further to the point that it would burst. The lesson here is based on tradition of the Pharisees, and that they hung on to the old. They didn't like Christ's teaching. They wanted him to go away. And that is what we need to understand from this passage, is it's a teaching. We don't like change. Many of us don't like change. but that's what the reference is. There was a change coming, and Jesus was pouring new wine into His disciples. There was something new coming, a new covenant. Jesus was going to bring that in with His death on the cross. That's what we need to understand. There's also the argument of medicine. And individuals want to go to 1 Timothy 5 in verse 23. Now, we understand that grape juice has medicinal properties. Resveratrol is a compound that is present in grapes, grape juice, and wine as well. And it helps to lower blood pressure. It helps with blood fat. It helps brain health and joint health and these things. So overall, the resveratrol content and its isomers tend to be similar in grape juice and wine, although with large variation ranges in both of them. Depends on the manufacturing process. That is a quote from Grape Juice and Wine, a comparison on resveratrol levels that I have here. And I will be more than happy to provide that to you. But what is the understanding here is that some of the same properties that many push that are in wine, alcoholic wine, is still present in grape juice, the resveratrol. That is the property that, or the compound that's pushed that, hey, this is good for you to drink a glass of wine a day. Why not just drink a glass of grape juice a day? Because alcohol has more negative effects than good. I heard a lecture from a doctor, and I won't name his name. I don't know if he wants his name named, but from a heart doctor, and that's exactly what he said. He said that the alcohol does more damage to your body than the resveratrol would do good. It had more negative effects. In some of my research and things that I have read, the medical community years ago heavily used alcohol, but as more compounds and more medicines and different things were developed, they transitioned away from that. And also, I have not found any proof on this, but there is a rumor when the stomach virus goes around, everybody says, hey, get you some grape juice and drink it. That it's rumored to help with that as well. If you didn't know that, there's a side note. It may be something that may help you at some point in time. But here in 1 Timothy chapter 5, in verse 23 specifically, we're talking about Timothy's stomach issue. He had a stomach issue in 1 Timothy 5 and verse 23. And from this we can glean that Timothy was not one to drink any wine. Matter of fact, here Paul suggests that he drink a little bit of wine, but for a specific purpose, for his stomach's sake. And this shows us just how careful Timothy was in approaching this wine. And this is an argument that people like to use, that it's okay. 1 Timothy 5 verse 23, Paul says to Timothy, drink no longer water. That's interesting. We never bring that phrase out. We'll come back to that. Drink no longer water, but use a little wine for thy stomach's sake and thine often infirmities. See, people focus on the wine, and they want to run with that. Well, the wine was mentioned here. He was told to drink a little bit of wine. I go out to have my steak dinner with my buddies or whatever, and we're just going to have a little, just a few drinks. Nothing much. A little wine. That's not the usage here. That's not what he's talking about. drink no longer water, but he was mixing it with the water. Now, why was he doing this? He had a stomach issue. Now, was this alcoholic? We don't know. We can assume it was based on what we know about alcohol. Maybe the water was bad and the alcohol would kill bacteria, but maybe it wasn't alcoholic. Maybe Timothy knew somewhat of what we know, or Paul knew somewhat of what we know today, and people think grape juice helps with stomach bugs and different things. Maybe that was the reason. We don't know. We're not informed other than he was told to drink a little oinos. And that can be translated either way. But the argument that this is giving me permission to drink wine, based on this passage, there was a use here for it. And it was medical only. It wasn't for every day I'm sitting at my meal consuming wine. I'm going to drink a little wine. He had an issue. There was a medical reason for it. It's just like Tylenol or ibuprofen. We don't use those things. We don't consume those things and eat those things like candy. You only use those things. You only use your prescriptions and those things as you need them. What about drink no longer water? Do you ever hear anybody say, we shouldn't drink water? Paul said, drink no longer water. Well, no, they don't make that argument and make that case because it's outrageous. Just like pulling out of this passage that I'm going to use a little bit of wine and I'm going to justify social drinking based on that. There was a specific purpose. So was it alcoholic? If so, if it was alcoholic, then it was only used as a medicine and not a beverage. If it was not alcoholic, then there is absolutely no excuse for this passage. Either way, there is no basis. Another instance that people will bring up is Matthew chapter 27 and verse 34. And Jesus is on the cross here. Matthew 27 and verse 34. Also in Mark chapter 15 and verse 23. And Matthew 27:34 says, they gave him vinegar to drink, mingled with gall, and when he tasted thereof, he would not drink. This vinegar, this concoction that they had put together, had the gall, it had this painkiller and those things in it. There was two different drinks. The first, wine mixed with gall, and then there was another one that was given to him, a second one, oxos, which is just vinegar and water. So here in Matthew 27 and verse 34, it's translated as vinegar. Also in Mark chapter 15 and verse 23, Mark 15 and verse 23, and he took the cup, wrong passage, 15:23, and they gave him to drink wine. Matthew said vinegar. Mark says wine, because it's the word oinos. Mixed or mingled with myrrh, but he received it not. He rejected it. But what did he take? He did consume the oxos. He consumed the vinegar. And verse 48, Matthew chapter 27, verse 48, and straightway one of them ran, took a sponge, filled it with vinegar. There's your Greek word oxos, the same kind of drink that the Roman soldiers would have to drink while they were on duty, and put it on a reed and gave him to drink. Excuse me. So from this passage in the crucifixion scene, there is no justification to drink wine because Jesus had it when he was hanging on the cross, because he rejected the wine mingled with the gall. He rejected that liquid that had those negative effects, but he took the vinegar that had no alcohol in it. Some also go to the qualifications for elders and deacons. In 1 Timothy chapter 1 and verse 3, we have a list of those qualifications also in Titus chapter 1. People like to go here and try to justify the use in the qualification of elders and that they are not given to wine, and deacons that they're not given to much wine. What is the passage talking about? What is it saying? 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 2, and a bishop then must be blameless, the husband of one wife, vigilant, sober. That's interesting. Sober, of good behavior, given to hospitality, apt to teach. And in verse 3, not given to wine, no striker, not greedy of filthy lucre, but patient, not a brawler, not covetousness. And some of the qualifications go on. But let's focus on verse 3, not given to wine. It's also mentioned in Titus chapter 1 and verse 7. For a bishop must be blameless as a steward of God, not self-willed, not soon angry, not given to wine, no striker, not given to filthy lucre. What does that mean? Not given to wine. What does that mean? What does that phrase mean? Well, if you look at the Greek, which we often need to do, you think about the translation of the New Testament, there is no doubt that we have the Word of God, but men translated certain words out of the Greek into English, and sometimes those words, we don't have a clear understanding of those because they're not the same combination of words that we may use today. I'll make a simple illustration. The word gay. I mean, you think about maybe the 1800s, somebody said 1700s, used the word gay, they would nowhere think that someone was talking or concerned about a homosexual. I think here recently the word cool. Think about the word cool may have always meant that something refreshing, a wind, a cool breeze, but people use it to express interest in something they like. Hey, that's cool. So we understand that sometimes it's necessary for us to go back to the Greek. And I'm not a Greek scholar by any means, but I can understand definitions of words when I find them. Not given to wine means brawler. Tarrying long at wine and becoming noisy and boisterous or insolent. It goes right against the qualification to be sober or to be of sound mind, to be temperate or of good behavior. To be a brawler, not given to wine. So there's your meaning. Same thing with deacons in 1 Timothy chapter 3 and skip down to verse 8. Likewise, must the deacons be grave, not double-tongued, not given to much wine, not greedy of filthy lucre, holding the mystery of faith in a pure conscience. And the list goes on. Not given to much wine. What does that mean? That means by or beside wine. Not to be by or beside wine, to turn your mind toward. It leads to overindulgence. The American Standard translates it as brawler, which is yet again the opposite of grave. Neither passage in which we're considering here with elders or deacons is speaking of the amount of alcohol We're not talking about the amount, but we're talking about the influence. And too many people get concerned about not giving to wine, not giving to much wine, that this is a quantity. We're not talking about a quantity. We're talking about the influence, the negative effects of this influence, of being a brawler, of being insolent, noisy. An elder shouldn't be that way. A deacon shouldn't be that way. What kind of example and what kind of influence would this individual have in the Lord's church today, especially in trying to help others, bring others to Christ, and all of those things? It is teaching right the opposite of what people think. It's not teaching the amount. It's not teaching moderation. Consider this with the moderation argument. Romans chapter 6 and verse 12. Let not sin, therefore reign in your mortal body, that you should obey it in the lust thereof. Okay. So let not sin reign. Well, I'm not going to let it reign, but I'll let a little bit of sin into my body. Well, I'm not going to completely yield to it. We're talking about the moderation. I'll just enjoy sin in moderation, but I'm not going to completely yield to it. We wouldn't make that argument, would we? I'm gonna play with sin. I'm not going to completely yield to it. Ecclesiastes chapter 7 and verse 17. Be not over much wicked. Over much wicked. Now be a little wicked. Be not over much wicked, neither be thou foolish. Why shouldest thou die before thy time? So is Solomon saying it's okay to be a little wicked? No, he's not. That would be a bogus argument as well. It's okay to be a little wicked. Don't be too much wicked, but you be a little wicked. Don't let sin reign in your body, but just have a little bit of sin. Not a good argument. Some also claim that the qualifications for elders, that this is referencing the addiction aspect. About being addicted to this. Not be given to it. I'm not addicted to it. That's not what it's talking about. Same questions apply. Is it okay to be a little addicted? Is it okay to be a little wicked? A little sin? Moderate addiction? That argument really doesn't prove anything. Because that's not what it's talking about. We're not talking about the amount of consumption here with these qualifications. It's the influence in these qualifications is what is being brought forth. The character of this individual and how they act and react. Some other passages that can be considered. Deuteronomy chapter 14 and verse 26. I don't have this on my slide here, but we will consider Deuteronomy chapter 14 and verse 26. The passage says, And thou shalt bestow that money for whatsoever thou so lusteth after, for oxen, for sheep, for wine, for strong drink, for whatsoever thy soul desireth. And thou shalt eat therefore before the Lord thy God, and thou shalt rejoice, thou and thine household. Interesting passage of Scripture. And of course, we need to consider the context. Some think by looking at this passage that, hey, he's talking about drinking, strong drink and wine and all of those things. And immediately when strong drink is brought up, people think whiskey, brandy, gin, whatever strong drink it is, that I can have it. And wine's mentioned here. They allowed it here in the Old Testament. This passage is giving difficulty to some. Before we actually look at the context and read some of the other verses around it, I want us to consider some other passages as well. Here in the book of Deuteronomy, the law is being re-given or is being retold to the Israelite people. Here, they're going to cross over into the Promised Land. Joshua is going to carry them over. Moses is giving them all of this information back to them again. In Leviticus chapter 10, you're familiar with that chapter, right? The beginning, at the onset of this chapter, what happened? Nadab and Abihu offered strange fire, and they lost their life as a result of it. Later on in this passage, it is brought up, do not drink wine nor strong drink. Talking to the priest. Do not drink wine nor strong drink, thou nor thy sons with thee, when thou go into the tabernacle of the congregation, lest ye die. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generation. So it is possible that maybe Nadab and Abihu had been doing that. And as a result of their being deceived by consuming this wine or this strong drink, as a result of their perverted judgment, they did something that was not pleasing to God. Here the priest is forbidden to drink wine or strong drink while working in the tabernacle. So it is safe to assume here, in this context, what is under consideration is fermented wine. Fermented strong drink is what is under consideration here. So was it acceptable to drink those things when not in service in the tabernacle? Good question, right? Well, think about this argument. An elder is supposed to be a husband of one wife, according to 1 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 2. What about when he's not an elder? Is it acceptable for him to have more than one wife? Proverbs 23 and verse 22 says, hearken unto thy father that begat thee, and despise not thy mother when she is old. Would it be acceptable for you to despise your mother when she's young? Don't despise her when she's old, but is it okay and acceptable to despise her when she is young? Or not hearken unto your father that begat thee, even if he was the only father one had? I think we can see what is being stressed here is the importance of the issue, and that is the consumption, and how important it is to honor your parents, and how important it is to live a life that's pleasing to God. You know, we often come into situations where we are asked to pray more than we normally do. The expressed need for prayer is often greater in certain situations, but does that diminish the importance of prayers in other situations? We are to pray without ceasing. 1 Thessalonians 5 and verse 17. We understand the principle here. In Numbers chapter 28 and verse 7, and the drink offering thereof shall be the fourth part of a hin for the one lamb. In the holy place thou shalt cause the... Now this is a sacrifice that's being taken place, and a drink offering is being offered here. The priests are doing this. In the holy place thou shalt cause the strong wine. We've got strong wine here. The priests weren't allowed to drink it, were they? What happened to it? The strong wine was poured out unto the Lord for a drink offering. Now, I'm not completely convinced that this was alcoholic all the time, but it very well could have been, I guess. It was poured out nonetheless. It was not drink, or it was not drunk. Genesis chapter 35 and verse 14, another instance where a drink offering was poured out. It was not drinking. And Jacob set up a pillar in the place where he talked with him, even a pillar of stone, and he poured a drink offering thereon, and he poured oil thereon. So he poured it out. Also in Exodus 30 and verse 9, you shall offer no strange incense thereon, nor burnt sacrifice, nor meat offering, neither shall ye pour drink offering thereon. The drink offering, we can see, is poured out. So back to the context of Deuteronomy 14, what's going on. We understand with the sacrifices and the things that took place in the tabernacle and on the altars, and all of these different offerings that had, and there were many different types of offerings that were made for different things, different reasons. Here in Deuteronomy 14, things are being brought to the tabernacle, or would be brought to the tabernacle to observe a feast or whatever the occasion was that was required for the Israelites to be there. So, going back up and looking at, let's look at about verse 24. You think about where the tabernacle would have been located. And for many years it was located in Shiloh. And it was moved around to other places. Ultimately to Jerusalem, and then we had the temple constructed, and people may not have lived really close in order to do this. So, looking at the context here, looking at verse 24. And if the way be too long for thee, so that thou art not able to carry it. Now, well, let's get back to verse 23. And thou shalt eat before the Lord thy God in the place which he shall choose to place his name there. So we're talking about the tabernacle. The tithe of thy corn, of thy wine, of thine oil, and the firstlings of the herds and the flocks, that thou mayest learn to fear the Lord thy God always. These feasts, these days, these Sabbath days, and these different things they were to observe were important, that they may learn to fear God always. So as a result of living far away, and if the way be too long for thee, so that thou art not able to carry it, to bring all of these things. Some of these journeys may have taken a month or more. If you lived in the northern part of the nation of Israel and you traveled down to Jerusalem, that would have been a journey of some great distance to travel. Some of these things may have spoiled before that time. And if the way be too long, that thou art not able to carry it, or if the place be too far from thee, which the Lord thy God shall choose to set his name there, when the Lord thy God hath blessed thee, then thou shalt turn it into money. Sell those things, take the money with you, bind up the money in thine hand, and go to the place which the Lord thy God shall choose. And thou shalt bestow that money for whatsoever thy soul lusteth after, for oxen, sheep, wine, strong drink, whatsoever thy soul desireth, for those sacrifices. What do you need? Well, I desire to have this for the sacrifice, or that. I desire to bring this for this offering or that offering. And thou shalt eat therefore before the Lord thy God, and thou shalt rejoice, thou and thine household. And the Levite, that would be of the Levitical priesthood, all the priests would come from the tribe of Levi. The Levite that is within thine gates, thou shalt not forsake him, for he hath no part or inheritance with thee. If you remember, they were not given land. They were provided for by the congregation of the people. And the things and the goods and the things that were offered as sacrifices on the altar, and the blood was poured out and it was burnt or cooked. They could eat of those things off of the altar. And of course, they brought other things. So, of these offerings and these drink offerings and this liquid that was brought, if it was fermented, it would have had to be poured out. It wouldn't be consumed. They could only have consumed some of those things that were unfermented, based on what we already know about Leviticus chapter 10 and Numbers chapter 28 and some other passages in the way in which these offerings took place. So we understand the context, and that nothing fermented was drunk by the priest. Who are priests today? Have you ever thought about that? Have you ever studied the book of 1 Peter, chapter 2 specifically? What is mentioned about priests? Who are priests today? The priest did not drink the fermented liquid. Another passage, and the last passage that we'll look at and we'll move on, is Proverbs 31, verses 4 through 7. This passage has caused difficulty for some. It is not for the kings, O Lemuel. It is not for kings to drink wine, nor for princes to say, where is the strong drink? Lest they drink and forget the law, and pervert justice due to any that is afflicted. That's not the part that gives people problems. Verse 6 and 7. Give strong drink unto him that is ready to perish, and wine unto the bitter soul. Let him drink and forget his poverty, and remember his misery, so no more. So we understand here from the first part that those kings and those that need to be of sound mind and sound judgment, and to understand the law, and to be able to execute those decisions that need to be made based on the law, they need to understand it. And they need to abstain from the strong drink. So the prohibition is given here not to partake of intoxicating liquid. But verses 6 and 7 seem to grant permission, if one were to read over that and not understand exactly what is being said. This is not a permissive statement. It is an acknowledgement of the lifestyle of one that would partake of those things. In other words, if someone's going to do that, then let them do it. It's not wise, but can you stop them, so to speak? Ecclesiastes chapter 11 and verse 9. Let's listen to that passage here. And the American Standard translates it. Rejoice, O young man, in thy youth, and let thy heart cheer thee in the days of thy youth, and walk in the ways of thine heart, and in the sight of thine eyes. But know thou that for all these things God will bring thee into judgment. In other words, we have another instance similar to Proverbs 31, verses 6 and 7. Go ahead and do it, but you're going to pay the price for it. And there are those that would drink this liquid. Those that are ready to perish, they don't have any value of their life or whatever the case may be. Those that are bitter in soul, those that tend to go to the bottle and take a drink. Let him drink and forget his poverty and remember his misery no more. Those are the ones that typically would have the urge to do those things. And so the saying here, the understanding is, if he's going to do it, let him do it. But he's going to answer for it. As Solomon writes here in Ecclesiastes 11 and verse 9, God will bring thee into judgment. Rejoice, O young man, in thy youth, and let thy heart cheer in the days of thy youth, and walk in the ways of thy heart, and in the sight of thine eyes. You go about and do those things, but you're going to answer for it in judgment. And that is the understanding we get here. Why would God contradict Himself? Habakkuk chapter 2 and verse 15, American Standard says, woe unto him. He doesn't say blessed is the man or anything of that sort. It says, woe unto him that giveth his neighbor drink, to thee that addest thy venom, and makest him drunken also. Woe is to him that give him drink, but that makes him drunk also. There's a woe unto him. So those are some of the passages that people